Ready? All right, good morning, everybody. Thank you. Thank you so much for giving us some of your time in the morning. Can everyone hear okay? We have a bigger mic, but is everyone able to hear everything fairly well? Okay. Thank you so much for joining us at our first Parent Academy of the year for this level for grades 4 through 12. We have a great panel this morning that's going to just be discussing the book, The Anxious Generation. I will put in a plug. We also have another Parent Academy geared really for K-12, but probably more for the same level. On Monday, November 25th in the evening, we are having an assembly. The Pierpont PTA is bringing in an assembly for the Pierpont students during the day that day about the digital, about being members of the digital generation with digital citizenship, reinforcing online footprint, kindness online with the students, and then there is a parent portion of that the PTA is also sponsoring for parents, and kind of what do we do as parents raising these kids that are part of the digital generation. So all are welcome. Please spread the word. It's open to any Rutherford parent, and that will be Monday, November 25th in the gymnasium here. I'm going to turn it over to Megan Coy, our director of our supervisor of elementary ed, and she is going to introduce our panel. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you. As Ms. Karen just said, my name is Megan Coy. You may have remembered me from the kindergarten center. For some of you, it was just last year, and some of you, it seems like a lifetime ago. But welcome. I'm really excited to have you here with us today, and I'm hoping that you will start to attend and be more actively attending some of the Parent Academy presentations that we have throughout the year. We have the videos of the workshops and the presentations that we will be running that will be posted online afterwards. So if you can't make it, but I do feel there's a benefit to coming, it allows our presenters to have that more engaging conversation as well, so we hope that we'll see you there. Today's conversation, it will take maybe like within a week or so they should be up there. So for going for future, they'll be online. So today our presentation is going to be from some of the ideas from the Anxious Generation that has been all over. I know many of you have read it or have referenced it or have heard Mr. Hurley speak of it. So today our panel is Mr. Hurley, is Mr. Ursulisi, he is from the high school. Ms. Romano, she is the SAC at Union School. Ms. Huzzy, she is the SAC at Pierpont School. Mr. Charlie Ryan, who is the supervisor of curriculum research and a lot of stuff. And we thank you, Ms. Carrion and Mr. Howell, for hosting us today.
You got it. Good morning, everyone. If at any time you can't hear well, the acoustics aren't great in here, just say it and we'll use the microphone. So that means that we use the microphone, the noise will even bounce off worse than it's bouncing off now. These little microphones are for the TV, so that's why you don't hear us any better, but the recording will hear us. So welcome, thank you for coming here. These are the folks, as I said, who are going to be. How many people have read the book? Okay, good. Okay, and again, I want to make something very clear. We're not promoting the book, although I think it's a great book to read. And I do get 10% for, no, I'm kidding. We're not promoting the book, but we're using the book as a catalyst, right, to talk about some topics that I think are very important ones to talk about. So, my charge as part of this panel is to just kind of lay a little groundwork about what's the reason we're doing this, why we think it's important. Not only have all of us here read the book, but several of us also attended a webinar that the author hosted and got a little more insight into the book. And we thought it would be something to really share. I've been in education for 47 years as a teacher, a coach, supervisor, administrator, now superintendent. I have children. I've been a parent, right? I have a grandparent now for the last 7 years. And both on my personal level and my professional level, and as a kid myself, before I became a teacher, right? My whole life has been around kids, right? Either as a kid or in my career and as a person. And, kids have always been kids. Things change a lot, but they don't change all that much. The development of the brain kind of is the same as it's always been. The development of the anatomy, puberty, growing up, right? It hasn't changed all that much. things that happen in the world, we've lived through, depending on how old you are, we've lived through world wars, cold wars, riots in cities that have burnt them down, presidents assassinated, presidents resigning, terrorist attacks that kill thousands of people. There's always been pressure in the world. We lived through personal issues, family issues, divorce, illness, death, right? Economic hardship. These things have always existed. But for some reason, for the last, on both a professional and personal level, we have seen the last 15 years, kids don't adjust to it too well. Adults don't adjust to it too well. Our coping skills have gotten diminished. Our anxiety level, especially among our young people, have gotten higher. Suicide ideation has gotten higher. Emotional issues have gotten higher. And we hear about all these pressures, right, that people are under, but like I just pointed out, these pressures have always existed. So, you wonder why. When I talk to the assistant principals, when I was the assistant principal back in the 90s, late 90s, my job was about kids getting into a fight, kids cutting a class, kids smoking in the bathroom. Right now, the assistant principal, Mr. Howell's here, he could probably attest to it, is more of a counselor, dealing with emotional issues. Okay? So you wonder why. I always thought it was very simplistic to try to say there might be one or two main causes of the difference. But then this summer, like many of you, I came across this book. Okay? And I started to think, let's start looking at what has changed. And what has changed is the influence of both social media, the fact that we all walk around now with the whole world in our pocket, and a reduction in what the other book, now let's forget what the other topic is in the book. We're going to do a workshop on that too, of whether you want to call it free play or student independence. Just last night in the news, I don't want to get off on a tangent, some woman got arrested somewhere because she let her kid walk to school. I mean, when I was a kid, my mother said, "I'll see you at dinner time." My mother would have been serving 20 years to life, right? Which might have been better than raising me, but that would be her decision. So those changes, it's hard not to look at what's really changed. Okay? So we're going to briefly touch upon our experiences from reading the book, our experiences in our professional life, our personal life, to kind of share with you some idea, to have a conversation, right? The phone-based childhood, right, versus the play-based childhood. And, I think there's some, the book, there's the book, the book, all right? And I want to mention that the author is not a one-off for him. He's written a lot of books. I think Mr. Ryan's going to touch upon some of them about topics like this, okay? I mean, this is not just he found a one-hit, wonder type thing. Real world, right? Play-based childhood is embodied. You're with other people. It's real, right? You're there. It's synchronous. It happens in real time. You have to have communication. High bar for entry and exit. You have to make a connection with somebody. You can't just friend them, right? You have to make a connection. And then when you break that connection, you got to have that hard conversation. So if I think back to being a kid, whatever we did, whether we played ball, whether we played, cops and robbers, whatever we did, we went out, we made up the rules. We picked the sides. We settled disputes. What do most kids do today? If they do that, a parent's organizing it. It's organized play. A coach is organizing it. If they're not doing that, and that's almost, hey, we hope they are at least doing that, it's virtual. And in that world, it's disembodied. It's asynchronous. It's not happening, okay, in real time. Okay? It's one-to-many communications. You don't even know who you're talking to. Everybody's chiming in. And there's a low bar for entry and exit. You can just friend somebody or unfriend somebody. You could mask who you are and make a comment. You can now create somebody else and say you're that person making the comment, right? So all of that has changed the dynamic of how we function and how our kids function. I want to read just two very short quotes from the book. And one says, he talks about immunity, right? Immunity system. Physical immunity, where sometimes you have to be exposed to certain things, right, to build immunity. We don't let kids do that anymore either, by the way. Okay, but it's the same dynamic for the psychological immune system. The ability of a child to handle, process, and get past frustrations, minor accidents, teasing, exclusion, perceived injustice, normal conflicts without falling prey to hours or days of inner turmoil. There's no way to live with other humans without conflicts. As the Stoics and Buddhists taught long ago, happiness cannot be reached by eliminating all triggers from life. So the phone base kind of works against this on two principles. Number one, you're not doing this free play, you are eliminating all the triggers because you're not out there dealing with conflicts. But on the other hand, you're inviting them in 24 hours a day. Right? I mean, when I was in school, if a kid called me a name, I went home, it was over. It's not over anymore. It's 24/7 with disembodied people, one-to-many communications chiming in and reinforcing that issue I was having with one kid. So it's a dynamic that doesn't build up the immune system, right? But also makes it hard to have that immune system because you're confronted with it 24/7. Your parents can't say to you anymore, just forget about it. Avoid him tomorrow. Because he's right there if we allow them to have them right there all the time. Okay? And the other quote I wanted to mention was later in the book where he talks about brain development and he talks about executive functioning. We're going to work on this. Okay? And he talks about how executive functioning skills are slower to develop in young people because it's in the last part of the brain to be rewired. It happens like during puberty. And skills essential for executive functions include self-control, focus, and the ability to resist off-ramps, distractions. A phone-based childhood is likely to interfere with that, and I think it's pretty obvious why. Because there's millions of distractions, there's millions of off-ramps. Okay? So one of the things we're going to talk about as we go through is a little deeper dive into these topics. So let's take a look at beginning at the end. What are the end goals? I'm going to mention a couple of things. Now, first of all, our goal is not to tell you how to raise your children. I mean, if you want to go home and say, everything they said, I'm doing the opposite, maybe you'd be better off. We're not trying to tell you how to raise your children. We're trying to have a conversation. And what he suggests in the book is no smartphones before high school. And, that's a tough one, right? But they could have a communication phone. I even think this is too much because I don't think it's necessary, but I have a 8-year-old grandson who has one of those gizmos. They could call like 4 people. But he can't go online and surf the whole world. No social media before age 16, another tough one. I mean, really, what is the benefit to any of us of social media? You know what it is? It replaced TV's bad now, so we watch social media for entertainment. I mean, what does it really gain? We need to realize it's an echo chamber too, right? Whatever you put in, it keeps throwing back at you. Why are we so polarized? I think we're so polarized because all you hear is what you believe in 24 hours a day, and you think everybody else is wrong. Phone-free schools. We're doing our best with that. Right? Kids can't have them in K-8. We have phone caddies in the high school. We We see them in the high school when they don't have, we do our best. But again, I say this respectfully. They are with us 6 hours a day. They are with you the other 18 hours. Right? So even if we tell them, leave your phone at the door, if you touch them, you get suspended for a month, the other 3/4 of the day, they're on your watch. And far more unsupervised play and childhood independence. We'll talk a little more about that down the road. So that's a conversation these folks are going to have with you. It's a conversation, ideas. If you haven't read the book, I'd suggest you read it, take a look at it. But, a couple of last thoughts from me, okay? I had this conversation with my son-in-law about my grandchild, and, he looked at me like I was crazy, but he does that a lot. I said to him, you probably don't let him leave the front yard without you being with him, right? You don't let him eat junk food nonstop. You don't let him ride a bike without a helmet. You probably don't let him go make a cup of tea, afraid he's going to burn himself. But you're going to allow him to go anywhere in the world, see anything he wants to see. You ever go on a site about, say, an alcohol site? It says, are you over 18? You go, yes, or 21, whatever it is. You say, yes, you're in. He can go anywhere he wants to go in the world, but you won't let him walk up the street. Tell me how that makes sense. How does that make sense? I'm not opposed to having a phone, right? I am when I'm bombarded 24 hours a day with things happening, I have to always work. It was like, I say now the job's become 7-Eleven, right? We're open 24 hours a day. I'm not opposed to technology. We can't exist without it. I'm not opposed to automobiles. I don't want 11-year-olds driving. Okay? So part of this is to give you information so you can make some thought process and conversations about how far you want to go with your own children. How do you want to deal with it? Okay? But I can tell you, as someone who's been in administration now since 1998, the change in the dynamic of our young people in the last 12 or 15 years is dramatic. And it's not a good change. So I think we have to have the conversation. Okay? So, Mr. Ryan, you're next up. And I'll turn it over to him. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hurley. Good morning. I'm Charles Ryan. I've been working with kids since I was about 18 as a summer camp counselor, camp director. I'm a history teacher by trade. Also, I've been a school administrator, and now I'm working in the central office doing more curriculum and bigger picture things like that. I came to this book. I'm a big fan of him from his previous work. So when this came out, I was excited. It was like a movie coming out or a new CD dropping. I was excited to get this and actually read it and see what's going on. And I'm going to talk to you about the points that he makes regarding the sociological aspect and the historical aspect of this. The central claim of the book is that the overprotection in the real world is underprotection in the virtual world, what Mr. Hurley just touched upon. So we're looking at this as a generational thing. As our kids are Gen Z, Gen Alpha. That's the pool in which we're discussing. And then we're coming at this from the perspective of baby boomers, Generation X, and millennials, and kind of the generational differences we see and what we had during our childhood versus what our kids have now during their childhood. Gen Z is the first generation in history to go through puberty with a device in their pocket. It pulls them away from people physically around them and into an alternative universe that's exciting, addictive, unstable, and unsuitable for the developmental age. And that's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with, and you touched upon, and we're going to talk about this a lot, is what this is doing to the children's brain mechanisms, brain waves, neurological transmitters. And Gen Z is also on target to follow through with this. Where'd this go? So, who here has said, I'm so glad smartphones or social media wasn't around in high school or college? I say this all the time. That's because I am a technology immigrant. We come to this as not understanding this from their perspective. And I say this to my kids. I'm a father of a high school and 2 middle school, 3 girls. So I say, I can't imagine having this, what you guys are going through. And they say, as a technological native, I can't imagine a world without it. And they can't, because they were born into this. They can't imagine having this not part of their social world or identity or anything like that. So kids these days, right? Who said kids these days? Kids have always gone through, always done things that parents don't like or don't understand. That's historically. Parents have never understood what kids are going through, and kids have always said, you don't understand, and you don't understand what we're going through. 1950s, rock and roll was the devil's music, right? You had the invention of the transistor radio and portable 45s, a record player. So now kids can go to their bedroom. Kids can go to parties with their friends and listen to their own music. Unlike the 1930s or 40s, where that radio was in the living room and they're all listening together. 1960s, you have the 70s, you have TV, highlighted youth culture. You had American Bandstand representing youth culture. You had the Brady Bunch idealizing what family should be like. And then you had the explosion of youth culture and the counterculture and the parents fearing their kids becoming long-haired hippies. You had 1980s, cable television, birth of MTV, Madonna, Michael Jackson, Bruce Springsteen. But think about what the effects that Madonna had and how mild it is in today's standards. You had movies like The Breakfast Club and Ferris Bueller Day Off that really solidified what kids were actually going through and actually listening to teenagers for the first time and understanding what they're going through and that life is difficult for them. It's not just, oh, buck up and suck it up and let's go move forward. So we understood this as a youth culture, what was happening. That became mainstream media. And all the time, advertisements are commodifying this. And then you had the 1990s to 2000, the internet, birth of the internet. But the PCs were in the living room. It was mild. It was more passive. TV was more passive. Radio is passive. So back in my day, you had 2011 to the present, the powerful technology is now interactive, not passive, and can fit in the palm of your hand. Preteens and teens can now access all the world's information. We're going to keep saying this. They can access everything unfiltered. Unless you put filters on these things, they can access everything. Social media affects human social norms in ways we've never seen. It's affecting all of us, as Mr. Hurley touched upon. So generations have always looked back and say, back in my day, things were better. And there's some of that happening. A technology-free childhood is simpler. And simpler doesn't necessarily equate to better, but the way I come from it, it is a little bit. And I do wax nostalgic about that to a certain degree. But that's not the issue we're concerned about. We are concerned about the collective action problem, and that's what Haidt talks about. It's, again, a good sociological look at what's happening today. The information he presents is very clear. The facts he brings forward is very clear and it's very readable. So, but there's other sources going on. He bases a lot of his research on this book right here. Why today's iGen, why today's super connected kids are growing up less rebellious, more tolerant, less happy, and completely unprepared for adulthood by Jean Twenge from 2017. And he talks about that in the beginning. His research basically takes from her research and moves forward to 2023, essentially. There's also The Art of Screen Time that I use personally as a parent trying to wrap my head around the appropriate use of screen time with my own kids when they were a little younger. The Coddling of the American Mind is his other book that I came to him, recommended by Mr. Hurley. And that basically has the preference of prepare the child for the road, not the road for the child. That we do too much to clear the road. We snowplow all the snow out of the way for the children, so therefore they can't understand some of the bumps, and it messes with their heads. So that's a really good book, and I highly recommend that. And Under Pressure, Confronting the Epidemic of Stress and Anxiety in Girls. Again, my wife and I read that, dealing with teenage girls in the house, that kind of wrap our heads around this. So this isn't just in a vacuum of this one work. There's other works out there that really adds to this conversation. So we aren't anti-technology. We're not. Harnessing fire advanced human civilization. It's a great tool, but it's also very dangerous. As Mr. Hurley talked about, the modern American society was built around the automobile. The 20th century was built around the automobile. and the evolution of safety and protection. Think about the invention of a stop sign. We went from a Model T to an SUV. We had to invent the concept of stop signs. When I was a child, my dad painted a wine crate and stapled a slab of carpet on it. That was my booster seat. Now, he'd be arrested today. You can't leave the hospital without a car seat properly installed, okay? So there's a big difference we're talking about here. Not to hammer the point home, but a hammer. A hammer is a great tool, but you don't go around pounding nails into the wall all day. So it's about, it's about moderation. Nor would we want a 10-year-old playing with fire, driving a car, swinging a hammer around all day. And that's what we're talking about here. Technology is good. We like technology. And the smartphone, we have to realize, is a tool. Keep that in mind. Unlike any other youth-centered technological advancement or trend, there are real negatives with this. We're not talking about Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven, and satanic messages. We're not talking about becoming a couch potato, sitting on, watching Saturday morning cartoons for 5 hours, which were the fears that we've seen throughout the last few decades. This is real. This is changing how kids behave, changing the neurotransmitters, changing their brain waves in ways we've never seen human beings. For the first time in history, evolution is now being dictated by technology, which is a scary, weird thing for us who haven't grown up with it, who are trying to wrap our heads around it. So, Mr. Ursulisi now is going to dive into the data about all this, and hopefully not scare you too much.
Well, before
And
Mr.
Early,
Ursulisi comes up, I want to clarify one thing, as Mr. Ryan was talking about, that I should have mentioned a little more. We're not trying to say that kids should not be exposed to certain things, right? What we're saying is, remember I mentioned brain development, right? At certain ages, the way things get, without going too deep into the woods on that, right? What you're able to process, how you're able to understand, how you're able to formulate responses, right? Comprehension is all based on brain development that occurs throughout, longer than physical development. I mean, well into adolescence, right? So if students are seeing, young people are seeing something that their brain's not able to, not for any fault, it's just because of normal development, to process, understand, or it could retard other development of the brain. So that's what we're talking about. So I don't want to be misunderstood. Oh, we're just trying to shield them from hearing about something, right? What can they process, right? How the way you talk to your children when they're 5 is different from the way you talk to them when they're 10 and when they're 15 and when they're 20. And part of that has to do with how they process and how they can formulate understanding. So that's what this is really tied into too. And and again, the book does go into that in a little more detail, and maybe some of our speakers will as well. Now, Mr. Ursulisi is going to speak.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. My name is Brian Ursulisi. I'm the English and Arts Supervisor for the district. I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the data. We've talked a lot anecdotally. Kids are different. It feels like this is happening. What we were able to do is dive down into a lot of the specific numbers over the years, using various surveys, using various tools when we look at what kids say about themselves. So this is these dates up top here, 2010 through 2015. That is the point where the social lives of the American kid went online. Now, if you were a millennial and you were in school in 2010, you probably had a Razr phone or a Sidekick, and it flipped open and you did T9 texting where each letter had to be hit 3 times, right? That's the beginning of it. Where kids are today they're in a very different place. However, kids who were in that young teenager point at 2010 through 2015, that was the first generation, like Mr. Ryan said, where they went through puberty with the entire internet in their pocket. Even if it was slow, even if it required you to press 3 buttons to get the letter T, you still had it. This is where the data comes in. We can see, based on medical documentation, surveys of parents, surveys of kids, this is the generation that became more anxious, depressed, self-harming, and suicidal. Girls are hit harder than boys. Preteen girls are hit the hardest of all. Boys are still impacted. They just use the internet in a very different way. They don't use the internet so much as a way for a self-realization or a self-actualization, but they still use it in other ways, and we'll talk about that as well. So this is where we are. February 2023, this is the share of adults reporting symptoms of anxiety and or depressive disorder. You look at the overall top here, this is everybody. Anybody age 18 plus, that's our number. It says 32.3%. All of these are going to be posted online, and I'm going to go through these quickly because I don't want to terrify you, but at the same time, I want you to get an overall picture of what we are seeing medically, psychologically, and sociologically from the actual data and not just anecdotally. Okay? These are our kids. These are our Gen Z kids who are now hitting 18 through 24. And you can see the numbers for this younger generation of adult, 18 through 24, it's almost 50%. 49.9% of people ages 18 through 24 have reported symptoms of anxiety or depressive disorder. That's not saying I woke up and I was sad because I had to go to work. That is an actual diagnosed anxiety or depressive disorder at a period of time. Not necessarily generalized anxiety disorder. It could be a short-term thing. However, that's where we are, all right? This is where the numbers diverge a little bit when we talk about girls versus boys. Major depression among teens. Now, this shaded area, this is that dated area here, 2010 through 2014. This is where we see kids going online full-time for the first time. This is the generation of kid that now walks around with the world in their pocket, and boom, you can see among girls the spike as things go up. Among boys, there's also a spike. There was a 161% increase in depression among boys, major depression among teenage boys since 2010. A 145% increase for girls since 2010. This is as we can see, we can literally target down and figure out at the point that kids had a device in their pocket full time, depression went up. This is the percentage of US college students, undergraduates, who are diagnosed with a mental illness. The majority of the ones that are down here, there are still increases. However, I don't want to use the word margin of error. That's not the right phrase. However, they're not as over the top as anxiety and depression. And again, here's our shaded area. This is the point where kids went online, and that's the point where we start to see this major uptick. 134% in anxiety, a growth in anxiety since 2010, and a 106% increase in depression since 2010. There are some other ones that do grow down there: ADHD, anorexia, substance abuse, schizophrenia, and bipolar disorder. However, those are not, it's significant, but it's still not the impact of the majority of people that we see. Again, we break it down by generation. The anxiety prevalence, ages 50 plus, they're not online like we are. I'm close to 50. I'm not there yet. But again, you can see, this is my generation, right? Gen X, we're right in there. The Gen X goes up through 49, and then you start to see your millennials, 26 through 34, and yes, they're impacted a bit, but then we hit Gen Z, that 161% increase since 2010. Look at that skyrocketing from the point where everyone has a device in their hand. And if you think back to those generational breakdowns that Mr. Ryan talked about, whether you were a baby boomer, whether you're Gen X, whether you're millennial, Gen Z, Gen Alpha, the data on Gen Alpha is not out yet. We don't know yet because they're still too young. But if this is any indicator, it's good that we're having this conversation, okay? US teenagers admitted to hospitals for non-fatal self-harm, suicidal ideation, but not going through with any sort of, not going through with it, and it wasn't fatal, okay? And if you look at the girls versus the boys, this has been true since the dawn of time. Girls are more likely to self-harm than boys. However, there is still an increase. And if you look at that girls number, that is terrifying, a 281% increase since 2010, the point where those kids started carrying those devices, okay? Suicide rates in general, it's the exact opposite, right? Girls may attempt suicide, boys go through with it, okay? And again, if we look at those numbers, and we have those numbers back much further, you can see that spike. And yes, there was a spike in the 90s, there was a spike in the late 1990s, but once we hit that gray shaded area, There it goes, right up to the top. 167% increase in girls and a 91.2% increase in going through with suicide since 2010. Okay, why not millennials? And I know some of the parents in here are millennials. Again, I'm Gen Z. I know Mr. Ryan is Gen Z. Mr. Romano, you're on the cusp, right? You're a millennial, Gen Z. I know Miss Romano because she graduated with my brother, and you're an Xennial. You're on the cusp. You're a Gen X millennial, okay?
I'm before Common Era.
Yes, this is true. BCE, Jack Hurley, BCE. It does make me laugh when you say you've been an educator for 47 years.
I used to carry a clay tablet with me, but it was so heavy I had a back problem.
Jack, actually, you were standing here when they built the first school. That's why you just ended up here. It was just standing in Rutherford. And no. So why not millennials? Why not Gen X? I purposely left my phone over there, and I think I've subconsciously checked my pockets about 8 to 10 times since we've been here. And I've also had the phantom buzzing. Do you get that? When you don't have your phone, but you think it buzzed in your pocket, and you didn't even have your phone with you. But why not us? Why are we not impacted in the same way? It goes back to what Mr. Ryan said before. We are not native to this technology. We came to it later. Our brains were somewhat developed by the time we got it, okay? Gen Z, not so. They've had it from the time they were fussy in the restaurant, and we gave them a tablet to keep them quiet. 46% of American teens say they are online almost constantly. I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. Yeah, I think that's fairly accurate. I don't know if it's constant. In our house, we try to have dinner together. It doesn't always work out because of play practice, and my 16-year-old has a job. But at dinner time, we don't have devices with us. But 46% of American teens say they are online almost constantly. That goes back to what Mr. Hurley said. You're being picked on in school. When I was a kid, if I had a fight or an argument or a kid called me a loser, which might have happened, maybe, I went home, I was upset, but I was able to move on from it because I didn't have a constant reminder. I didn't have that phantom buzzing in my pocket or the need to check to see if, was anybody defending me when he said that? Was anybody else piling on? And then it becomes almost an obsessive behavior that I need to check. Millennials came of age in roughly the same socioeconomic conditions with virtually none of the same ill effects. Millennials lived through 9/11. That was my second year teaching, I think, when 9/11 happened. A global financial crisis, climate change. How come it's not impacting millennials, Gen Z, baby boomers the same way? Our brains are already wired before we got it. We are not native to it. I like this slide because it actually puts names to some of the things we talk about. We talk about how kids might not be connected or they're not having face-to-face contact with people. These are the actual, like the fancy scientific names that sociologists and psychologists will use. Social deprivation. The idea that we have face-to-face exposure. And I'm going to show you some slides in a second that show how that has dropped among kids and among adults as well. Sleep deprivation. I will admit it. My phone is plugged in next to my bed. It's my alarm clock, okay? But that light, I could be, laying in bed and peripherally I see the light go, and instantly I'm no longer ready to go to sleep. I need to see what just happened on my phone, whether it's a news alert about the election or my brother needs me, right? There's this sense that the phone is going to bring me this information I need right away. Attention fragmentation. Phones constantly vie for attention. I teach English at the high school. I want a kid to read Hamlet, okay? I can't get a kid to pay attention more than 3 seconds because they're concerned, just like I am, and my brain was supposedly normally wired as a child. I want to know what my phone says. Our kids are wired to go to the phone for that information. And I'm going to show you a really interesting slide about advertising and TikTok in a second. And finally, addiction. It is a true addiction. There are people who are addicted to their social media apps. And again, this is not anti-tech. This, if anything, it's anti-social media because they have rigged the game so much the social media companies that they know what we want and they just constantly give it to us. If I like puppies, I'm gonna think everyone in the world loves puppies because that's all I see is happy puppies, okay? Think about that from a negative perspective though. If I think something may be negative, I'm gonna scroll through and I'm gonna find everything that reinforces my belief. So these 4 things that I talked about: social deprivation, sleep deprivation, attention fragmentation, and addiction. Here is the actual data. Social deprivation, the daily average time with friends. Look at that, our millennials, our Gen X folks, our boomers, a little bit less. 15-year-olds, 15 through 24, we hit that point and boom, they're spending 40 minutes a day face-to-face with their friends, okay? I don't know, I wanna go out and play, I wanna ride my bikes. And Mr. Hurley said it before, there was that woman, it was Georgia, Tarrant County, Georgia, last month. She let her son walk into town. Cop stopped him, he's 11. Cop stopped him and said, "What are you doing?" He said, "Oh, I'm walking to the store, I'm getting something for my parents." They went to the house. She didn't know exactly where he was. She said, "I sent him to walk into town," and she was placed under arrest for child endangerment. Okay? Whether or not it sticks, who knows, but that's where we go. There's a woman who does a lot of research on that. It's called Free Range Parenting. Her first book was called Free Range Parenting. Her name is Lenore Skenazy. You look her up, she's got some really interesting things. She parented her children when they were young in New York and used to let her kids ride the subway alone. And it became a media event, I want to say early 2000s when she did that. Attention fragmentation. This is the idea that, something else is going to take me away from what I'm doing. Stamina, attention stamina. And if we go here, these are the social platforms that shape Gen Z and their advertisement expectations. The average person on Facebook, 84% of them can live through an advertisement that's 15 seconds long. I know I grew up watching TV with like 3-minute ad blocks, radio with 5-minute ad blocks, waiting for that next song to play so I could hit record at the same time and hope the DJ wasn't talking, okay? YouTube, a 15-second ad, okay, we're good with that. We get up to Snapchat and we get up to TikTok, 3 seconds, 3 to 15 seconds. The average teenager, 50%, so 1.3 to 3 seconds. Gen Z loses active attention for advertisements after just 1.3 seconds, okay? The reason I trust this is advertisers, they're in it for the money. They know what people can tolerate, so I'm willing to bet if they are going to sink their resources into making 2-second commercials, they're doing it for a reason. It must be true. I can't imagine what a 2-second commercial would be. It's Nike, thank you. I don't know how that works. And then finally, our average time spent using social media, I think this is pretty obvious. Kids use social media more than adults. They use it for different reasons. I try to text my own kids. They don't answer me on texts, but I would be willing to bet if I had a Snapchat, which is how they all talk to each other, they would answer much more quickly because they communicate via the messages on the social media devices, not on the texts. I said something to my junior class the other day, my English class, about the green bubble versus the blue bubble. If you have an iPhone and you're texting another iPhone, it's blue, but then there's always somebody in the group chat that has a non-iPhone and it turns it green and you don't like that. They didn't know what I was talking about, the 16-year-olds. They were like, "You text?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm cool." And they were like, "No, you're so not cool at all." Journal of the American Medical Association says spending more than 3 hours per day on social media increases the risk of mental health problems. 2023, well, let's talk about something good. In 2023, 58% of teenagers said social media helps them feel more accepted. Okay, so yes, there are benefits. But again, There's benefits of fire, there are benefits of driving a car, but maybe we need some guardrails, maybe we need some seatbelts. 71% see it as a creative outlet. There is amazing stuff on social media that, yes, kids are doing, whether they're reading their own poetry, they're sharing their own artwork, they're making a friend that they might not have made because they were able to create a social group or join a social group that they might not have in a small town. Yes, there are benefits. 21% of kids say their lives would be worse without it. That number shocks me because you would think kids would want to be on social media all the time, but 79% of them go, I don't know if it's so great. 21% say their lives would be better without it. Just some final data charts here. 8th, 10th, and 12th graders, when you aggregate it, this is the percentage of kids who feel satisfied with themselves. And you can see it's pretty straight from 1991 up until 2011, and then we see that drop off. Right? Social media is teaching our kids, that's what I can extrapolate from this, social media is teaching our kids that they're not good enough. Whether it's because of what they're seeing, what they're consuming, what other people are telling them. And on the opposite track, life often feels meaningless. Look at the numbers go up after 2010. It's a little bit tough. So now that I've terrified you with some scary numbers, let's talk about the actual mental health impact. And then at the end, Ms. Romano is going to talk about, well, what can we do? All right? I don't want you to just be terrified. I want you to know that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. What's next?
So he says.
So I say.
I have to say, when I was going over this last night and I showed my daughter and my husband, I was going through all the statistics. I don't like looking at that because it is a little scary, but I am hearing that throughout my school day with your kids. I'm actually also in the thick of this right now because I have a 15-year-old daughter who is literally draining my whole existence, and a little boy who is really cute and really warm and fuzzy for most of the time, and he's in 2nd grade. But what I'm finding throughout the work that I'm doing with your kids in Rutherford is that things have changed. I've been here for 23 years. And one of the things I'm constantly doing is trying to help educate them on what social media does to your mental health. So where do we even start? So for me, if I can use this correctly, sometimes, yeah, the technology I'm not great at. It's not my first slide. So, missed something? Yeah? Can't hear me? Okay, sorry. Okay, I'm back in the scary data. All right. Okay, so right now, with this fear of missing out, FOMO is a real struggle in my house, and it's also a huge struggle here for the kids in 4th to 6th grade. So in my experience with my children in social media, my son doesn't have it, and he won't have it based on what my daughter is going through. So I think some of the research indicates that until they're 16, you really shouldn't expose them to any social media outlet, which is really hard, because what I'm finding, not only with my own daughter, but here, just like Mr. Ursulisi said, the Snapchat is the way they're communicating. And so I resisted Snapchat for such a long time with my daughter until all the planning of any type of get-together was going down on Snapchat. So I let her have it, and it was okay from the beginning of like 6th grade. I really didn't have any issue with it until about 8th grade, and things started to change a little bit. But one of the things that happens is they're constantly plugged in and seeing what everyone else is doing. And we talk about trying to get them to do more academics and be less distracted, but they have that phone in one hand and their Chromebook in the other. And that's how they're doing work. So that's how, on a daily basis for me, when I walk into my daughter's bedroom and she's doing her work, that's what it looks like. And then for her, she typically is pretty good at balancing. However, over the course of the last couple of weeks, she's had some friendship conflict and some switches in friendship groups. And so now this FOMO has changed in a lot of ways, because where she was once invited to everything, now she's seeing that she's not getting that invite. And she doesn't cry about it, she's not overly anxious, but she's agitated and nasty to pretty much anyone that gets in her way. So, the FOMO that comes out for these kids, it's scary. Right now, 4th and 5th graders are really using TikTok. That's what I find most that our kids here in Rutherford or in Pierpont School are using. So those kids are following, who's doing what at whose house, and if they're invited or not invited, and who's doing the dance and all the moves that you see 24/7. And the kids are starting to, compare and contrast. Like, am I invited? Why wasn't I invited? Sometimes they're feeling excluded and it's on purpose, while other times it's just they weren't there when they were walking into someone's house. One of the things I say to the kids in Rutherford and my own daughter and son, you cannot be invited to everything. And that's a really hard concept for them to gain. And it's hard for even adults when there's things being posted and you see that you're not invited to something. But these kids now are seeing that and they're constantly connected, constantly picking up that TikTok or that Snapchat, looking at people's stories. These are all kind of filtering through, and the addiction is there and the compulsion is to constantly check it. And then that cycle goes, oh, I feel so bad, I'm not invited. And so what ends up happening is it gets in the way of all the other great things that are going on. Even in sports, or you achieve something academically, if you're not invited to that party, that's where these kids kind of are starting to really get hung up, or really have been hung up for quite a while. One of the things that I see, with Instagram, Snapchat, and TikTok, is the fact that at any given time, especially on Snap, I'm not sure if your kids are using Snap right now, but they have a Snap map, that location. And you can scroll in or like really enlarge, and you can see their bit emojis and where they're at. And what happens is I find that my daughter is often checking this, and she'll say to me, oh, well, it just helps me to know because we'll need to leave sooner because they're already there. But it works in that respect, but when she's not invited somewhere, then it doesn't work. One of the things that I thought was really interesting is that her and her friends belong to some app. I don't even know which app it is, but it's like Life 360. And I was hearing like these dings, 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 and I'm like, what is that? And she said, oh, well, Jenny and Sally are at Starbucks now. And I'm like, how do you know? She's like, oh, well, we're all on this app, so when we get to the mall or we get to Starbucks, then we all know we're there. So, and then I'm like, well, what happens when you're not there? And she's like, oh, that sucks. Yeah, it does. It really sucks. And so it starts to play on their psyche, and it's scary. And if you're here, you're probably seeing this stuff at home. The good news is that there's things we definitely can do. And so I'm experimenting a little right now based on some of the things that I'm doing with my daughter and the kids in Rutherford, and what I'm not doing with my son based on those things as well. So, let's see if I can do this. Okay, so anxiety and mental health. Social media is definitely increasing the anxiety, and it's due to those comparisons. So I chose these slides based on what I thought was really hitting home in Rutherford and in my own home as well. So the comparisons on like Facebook, Instagram, the pictures that all the kids are taking, and there could be 100 pictures and one gets posted. But either way, there's an obsession with getting, and looking a certain way when you're posting your picture online. And so when these kids are on, Insta, and they're seeing their influencer with their dupes and their, the non-dupe makeup, this becomes something that now they're striving for and they want to be a part of. And so sometimes what ends up happening is they start to feel less than, because either, I'm not buying $50 makeup every day, and so the kids start to feel that like, oh, well, she has that, or he's doing this. And so it does increase that anxiety for sure. And then that, you're always wanting to look and feel like you're in it and you're, with it, and you're up to speed with everything that your friends are up to speed with. And these are not problems like we talked about, or Mr. Hurley mentions, that we are awful at this as well. Like when we were growing up, we had these things that popped up as, we're experiencing them just as they are. However, they are constantly in the know, and they have it at their side. And I think that, unfortunately, our life lessons, we learn them a little bit differently. And so, and as they learn them, we have to do better at really helping validate how they feel, but at the same time, expose social media for what social media is. It's typically smoke and mirrors, right? Because again, like I think back to the Christmas picture. I don't know if you guys do Christmas photos and you're sending the card out, and I'm on Facebook and I see the family of 4 and they're all there, mom, dad, they look great, they're not sweating, everyone's looking in one direction. I stopped doing family photos, I would say about 10 years ago. My kids take the photo, it's hard enough to get them to look in one direction, but my husband and I don't even bother. Because then you see these photos and you're like, oh my God, Now I know, and we know, that that photo that that person's posting on Facebook probably took about, 3 hours? But how do the kids know? How do they know that their influencer that they follow doesn't have that backlight, right? Or the filters on. So they see these kids and young adults, and they look really great, but it's smoke and mirrors, and they don't get it. But then they start to feel less than, and it starts to really impact them. The heightened levels of anxiety, we often talk about sleep. Sleep is not new that we need it, that 8 hours. But there's all this research that we do and try to focus on getting a certain amount of sleep, because it's not only healing our bodies. So through physical trauma, when you're sleeping, that's when most healing is happening. But that's what happens also when you're having emotional trauma. And remember, emotional trauma might look different from when we were experiencing emotional trauma. Their emotional trauma might be they're not getting the like on TikTok. They are living their life. It's almost like a life or death experience. Like, do I get the like? Do I have as many likes? Do I have as many views? And so as this comes up, it's really keeping them up at night. My daughter now lies every chance she gets. Whereas before she used to say to me, "Mom, can I lie to you?" And I would say, "No, let's hear the truth." But now, when I'm like, "You have your phone? You put your phone away? Is it downstairs?" Yeah. Okay. And 10 seconds later, I go in the room and it's sitting on her desk. And I'm like, "Give me the phone." And then a couple hours later, I put the phone where it belongs, and then I happen to get up to go to the bathroom. What do I hear at 1 o'clock in the morning? Her and her friends on Facebook or FaceTime, or on Snap. She won't take her makeup off at night because she wants to get that last Snap picture. That's a problem. So when we're talking about anxiety, the sleep disturbances is a real thing, and it's important that they start to take those distractions away, so they're getting that mental health, that emotional, clearing of the brain as they're sleeping, because that's when they're starting to feel better and that healing is happening. Okay, the pressure and the comparison, going back to those pictures that they see. I think a lot of the times with the filters and the online lights and all that great stuff is really wonderful, but it's really just, creating more anxiety for them to feel less than and like they don't have what this influencer has. I don't know if your children have Stanley Cups or Lululemon bags. That's been a big thing over the course of the last, I'd say, 2 years, where most of our girls from 4th to 5th wear a Lululemon bag and they carry their Stanley Cup. Now, the Stanley Cup also has to be a Stanley Cup, not a version of the Stanley Cup. So when that influencer is there showing everybody how great their Stanley Cup is, you have kids going and trying to get this cup. It's $40. And for my child, she loses everything. So we're on, I think, our 3rd version of a Stanley Cup. But we had something here where there was a girl in 4th grade with the real Stanley Cup, and then the fake Stanley Cup her friend had, she was being made fun of because it was the generic Stanley Cup. So this is the stuff, right? So they're seeing it on social media and they bring it in. Again, nothing different than what we had going on. I mean, we had to deal with these things, exclusion, mean girls. We all had this going on. However, in the 90s, I can't believe I graduated in the 90s, and I'm saying that as Mrs. Coy's filming me, but when I was leaving on a Friday and I knew there was going to be a party, I just left, and I went home and I closed my door, and I didn't have to be locked into what my friends were doing. And then by Monday, something else happened in between, or maybe I was invited to something on a Sunday, so you didn't really even hear so much about it on a Monday. But now, because everything is live, these kids are comparing their social lives and the parties they're getting invited to, and it starts to really, again, become that distraction that is so hard to really try to, how do you balance it? And I think as we sit here and we talk in a little bit about some solution, I think after we put some things into place, there are some changes we can make and really see something positive happen. And I actually am, like I said, I'm doing this right now. I chose the executive functioning, when I was reading the book, I was just, again, trying to figure out, like, what could I bring to the table here? And so this is also something that I work really closely with kids in groups, small groups, and or individual counseling. So when we think of executive functioning challenges, executive functioning controls decision-making, feeling regulation, planning, organizing. And so when I think about those types of challenges, I always think about the ADHD kid. But I forget that it's not just for the kid with ADHD, it's for all of us. These are skills that we learn through trial and error, right? We had to make mistakes, we had to fail. And, thinking back to when I was, helping my daughter as a young adolescent, there were a lot of times I was trying to get in the way of her failing because I didn't want her to have to feel, the pain or the exclusion or whatever she was going through at the time, which looking back now, I'm not super thrilled that I did that, but one of the things we have to do is allow them to have those experiences and not overprotect them, because then you end up with, a teenager that really can't function or can't make decisions on their own. So the excessive cell phone, they disrupt the skills by promoting multitasking and attention fragmentation. So as I was reading all the stuff on the anxious generation, I was coming across other articles, and there was a doctor that mentioned something about attention residue, which again is what Haidt describes as that attentional or that attention fragmentation. And I never thought much about my daughter having the phone while she was doing her work, but what I was reading was there was that attention residue is what this one particular doctor mentioned. And it was about, as the children multitask and look at their phone, it's leaving over residue in their brains that they can't now take in the information that they really need to take in, because they're caught up in whatever they left. And the more they do it, it's that hard wiring where then now it's a compulsive feeling that they have to constantly do, and then it prevents them from being successful. So the residue comment really kind of got to me. I changed some things as well at home just based on that comment or that thing that I read. And then again, the long-term effects, the difficulty managing tasks. That's a hard skill. It's something they have to learn. And as they constantly interrupt themselves with all that social media, it really does become harder and harder. What I will say at the end of the day, Mr. Hurley mentioned this early when we had our opening meeting, that a 1% change that you start working on and you make these small changes that it does amount to something bigger. And so I've been thinking about that since our first day of school, and I have made small changes with my daughter, huge changes with my son for screen time, and it's really impacted my house in a positive way. So I think our next speaker over here, Mrs. Romano, she's gonna have some good suggestions. But I'm thankful that you guys are here. I think we're all on the same team. We want what's best for our kids, and we want to support them emotionally and socially. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to try not to use this, if that's okay. And if you can't hear me, I will. Okay. All right. I'm Carrie Romano. I'm the Student Assistance Council over at Union, and I'm so glad to have you guys here. We are all here, like all the presenters said. Can you hear me, Mr. Hurley? Okay.
Don't ask me.
Okay. I saw you moving over. I wasn't sure if I should use the mic. Oh, gosh. Okay. All right. We are. So we're all here. We're so grateful that you're here because we all care about your kids. We all care about what happens to our kids, and we want what's best for them. So I'm going to go through some strategies to maybe help some small changes, like Ms. Huzzy just mentioned, that may be helpful for your family. You could take it or leave it. Some of these may work for your family, and some may not. Again, like Mr. Hurley said in the beginning of the presentation, we are not telling you how to raise your kids, but these are just some small things that I took from the book and some of the knowledge from other articles that I read throughout my time as a counselor that may be helpful for your family, okay? All right, so as we were just talking about the tension residue and different things about how we're all multitasking, right? When we put our efforts into a little bit of everything, we don't put it enough into one thing, right? So when we do this multitasking things, we might be looking at social media, but we might be taking a phone call, we're looking at our phone book, we're looking at our Chromebook or our computer. We're not giving our full attention to anything. And we deserve our full attention, right? You deserve our full attention, okay? I'm not saying you have to do it all the time, but there are times where you can where you really should put your full attention to it, such as for the students, their homework, right? Homework is a big battle in my family, but when we have these distractions, when we have the computer there and we have me on the phone and things, it's a lot worse. When we dedicate that time to it, when we take those phones away, when we're not getting those alerts, when they're not checking to see where their friends are, they can focus much more, and some of that battle can be removed, okay? So music is okay, music is beneficial to a lot of classes. Some of the teachers use it, it can be beneficial, but having the phone in a different room so that you're not hearing that buzz and that constant notification can be very helpful. Do you have a question? Sure.
My son uses music.
Yeah, yeah,
And then he loves said, oh, that's great.
yeah.
However, I feel that it's still a
Distraction.
I walk in and he's
Changing the thing.
No, I'm changing the song. I'm
Yeah.
like, is he? Is he
Yeah,
not?
yeah.
So,
Yeah, so I mean, I think, you know, you have to do what's right for you, right? You know your kid best. You know I have two daughters. One is very different than the other. One thrives with music and the other one can't focus, right? She needs it quiet, they're just different. So you know your kid best, right? So if you feel like the music is a distraction or the phone, you know, maybe they can use, I don't know, we have Alexa in my house. So maybe you want to use an Alexa so the phone's not there and they're not seeing the notification and it's just running. You know, that might be something, it's not huge, but you know your kid best. So if music isn't working, then try it without it. You know, it doesn't hurt to try something. If it's not working, you could always change course, okay? Yeah, no problem. Like even at night, you know, we watch TV and things like that, but sometimes I find myself scrolling social media, you know, so my kids will be asking me a question. You wanna make sure that you're trying to reduce the multitasking with the social media, okay? Because again, regarding the attention fragmentation and what Ms. Huzzy mentioned, it just kind of pulls you a little bit everywhere, okay? So just discouraging multitasking. So I know Mr. Ursulisa talked about like Snapchat and that's how they communicate. I do think that there are times where you really should turn off social media notifications. I don't think it's, you know, as they talked about, we're constant buzz or trying to get that constant feed. When I see the students, when they used to have their phones, or at the end of the day when they're bringing their phones out in the hallway, you see them scrolling, there's notification, notification, notification. And it goes along with what Ms. Huzzy said, what all, it touches upon a little bit of everything. There's that fear of missing out. There's that, where is this person? So there are times throughout the day where I feel like reducing those notifications can be very helpful, right? I found this helpful for myself. During COVID, right? When we were working, I was working virtually and it was getting email and constant notifications. I couldn't turn my brain off. So I turned off those notifications. I could still check my email. I could still check those messages, but it wasn't that constant, like, I have to do this right now, right? Going back to Pavlov, right? That bell when they train people, like you hear that buzz, you feel like you have to get it right now. But if you don't hear that buzz, the information's still there. You can check it when you have time, if that makes sense. And then also, this is just, and again, I'm by no means telling you, and I make mistakes, and I do this in my own house, but I try to be aware of it, and I think that's the point of these possible small shifts, is to just raise awareness, right? So we want to try to teach them, as they're having these cell phones and things, proper etiquette. This is something that they probably haven't had, right? So if you constantly have a phone, and I'm having a conversation with you, but I'm checking my phone, I'm not giving you my full time, right? We have to model that as adults, and I know it's not always easy, but I think if we're aware and conscious, like sometimes I'll catch myself and I'll be like, wait, let me put my phone over here and let me talk to you, let me hear you. So I think modeling that and even teaching them that can be very, very helpful, right? They don't know, they don't, we have to teach them, right? This is their first time with some of them in the fourth grade who may be getting cell phones. We have to show them that there is a real human behind that phone, right? So when somebody's with you, when you're engaged with your friends, you want to be engaged with your friends. You don't want to be like, sometimes I see kids when I'm out and they're just sitting there. The other day I was at Dunkin' Donuts, there were 3 kids just sitting there staring at their phones. And it's sad, you know? Like, I'm not saying you have to be fully engaged the whole time, but they're not engaged when their phones are there. So I think to model that and to show that there are times, yes, there are times when you're gonna be looking at your phone. I'm not saying that. There are times when you need a break. There are times when I need a break. But to model that and to have a discussion with them about, like, when we're talking or when you're with, grandma or grandpa, you want to put your phone away, you want to listen, and then you could check your phone later in a couple minutes, okay? So just kind of being aware of that. So some of these things you probably already do, but I feel like it sometimes takes the battle out or the fight out with your kid. So setting up screen time, right? So I know some of the middle school parents do it. I'm assuming some of the younger parents, but setting up screen time can be very useful. You decide what works best for your family. If you have certain times where you want them to focus and they can't have access to the things, parental controls, and bedtime mode. I know we talked about the sleep deprivation. This is a huge thing in the middle school. I asked some of the kids when they come down to my office, what time did you go to bed last night? Because they look like some of them are going to bed at 1, 2. I had a kid the other day said they went to bed at 4:30 in the morning. Like, I don't know how you function or you can learn when you're going to bed that late. I know I can't. Maybe in high school, I don't know. I'm just kidding. I definitely couldn't function and be a successful student, right? So, and I know we talked about this, and again, some people use their phones for an alarm. I say get a different type of alarm for your kid if you need to. If you can, if it's feasible, because having the phones in your room, like Mr. Ursulisi talked about, right? It's that constant like, ooh, who texted me? Or what's that notification? So even if you can please, encourage your families to take those devices outside of your room, it's helpful for that sleep success, and it's also helpful, because they need to power off, right? You literally need to power off your brain in order to fall asleep. If you're constantly waiting to see what that notification is, you can't settle, right? You can't get a full good night's sleep when you're looking for that. And even any devices, right? So some of the younger kids may have iPads. I know my kids do not have a phone, but they have an iPad. So we keep that. They're not allowed to be in the room at night. It's something that definitely can't. I have a funny story. This other parent that I coach with, he said his daughter snuck the iPad, and she was, they have this set it up. She snuck the iPad and she fell asleep with the iPad, and it burned her face. So she fell asleep. And she's like, I was so upset, but I felt like that burn was like something that like she had to, but it happens. I mean, that's a physical, but she fell asleep with the iPad on her face, and she had a physical burn from it. So, just keep it out of the bedroom if you can. And setting boundaries is okay, right? So if you already have a phone and you've already, your family has set that course, I just want to note this because Haidt says it in the book. It is, okay to change course. It's okay for you to set a boundary, okay? So if you've let your kid have free range and now maybe hearing these discussions and all these different data, it's okay. I think just having a conversation with your family and with your kid and say, what works for us? So if you decide that you used to let them have 4 hours of screen time and now you want to shift it to maybe 3, again, start small, right? And I also read somewhere that it's maybe not start with the screen times, making your boundary muscle maybe with the snack after school, like an hour before dinner, maybe the best place to start versus saying you're not going to have screens, right? You want to start giving them boundaries. That's what our job is, and we want to make our kids safe, right? That's what our goal is. Safe, healthy, happy kids, right? So it's okay for you to change course, right? It may be hard, right? It's hard whenever you change something, but starting small can be really, really helpful, and whatever works for your family, right? I just have 2 more quick things, and talking with your kids regularly about what you see on social media, okay? So talking with your kids about what they're seeing online, what they're interested in, what they thought of their friends' post. That can lead to a lot of great topic discussions with your family, with your kid, to hear about what they're interested in, to hear about what they liked about a post or what they didn't. And then you could have really good conversations with your kid regarding that. So talking to them regularly, I'm not saying every day, you don't want to hound them because then they're going to just tune you out or not want to share anything. But if you can open those lines of communications every once in a while, I think it really opens up the discussion, which could be very helpful in all in all aspects, right? Just watching out for problematic behavior, such as interfering, like we said, the sleep time, regular physical activity, in-person social interactions and commitments. And if you feel like, and I'm not saying I want to give you homework or anything like that, but sometimes we don't realize how much time we're on social media, right? Sometimes, those business people, those social media people, they have designed it so that it keeps scrolling, so that you keep seeing these stories. And before you know it, right, I've done this myself. I'm like, I'm just gonna look at this for 20 minutes. And then before I know it, it's an hour and a half later. I'm like, oh my God, what did I just do with this time? So just being cognizant, might be a good tool to just say, like, I want you to just monitor yourself for 4 days, right? Or for a full school week. How much time are you actually spending on it, right? Because, oftentimes I'll hear kids say, like, I don't have time to do my homework, I was so busy, when in actuality, maybe they were spending so much more time on their social media. So just a note, it might be a useful tool for you to gauge as a family. Wait, I think I had one more. Did I? Maybe not. Maybe that was my last one. Sorry. Oh, this one. Yeah, this is the last one. So we have phones, right? Technology is very useful, like we said, in a lot of aspects. But and from my older students and older families here, I think you could use social media for beneficial too. So I don't want to just say don't, at the appropriate times, that you find helpful for your family. But you can build a positive online portfolio, which I think can be very beneficial to your kids, right? So even if you have younger kids, you may want to start having those conversations about how do you want to be branded, right? Because, we say don't judge a book by a cover, but we're humans and we do. So you want to make sure that you're presenting what you post online, how you want to be viewed, right? Because you could, it's very beneficial for colleges, it's very beneficial for high school, and just for your overall self-confidence, right? So highlighting some of the things. If you're a really great artist, maybe post your artist. If you're doing volunteer work or you are really into a specific cause, maybe you want to post about it because you're building your brand, you're building who you want to be known as, you're building who you want to be seen as. And even talking about that with your kids is a very beneficial conversation because I think it just opens a line of communication about how you want to see, how do you want to be viewed in the world, right? How do you want to be seen by others if you are on social media? If you're constantly posting about, negative things or, like inappropriate things, that's how you're going to be viewed, right? So you want to build yourself as the volunteer work, the accomplishments, and branding yourself in a positive way. I think that's my, yeah.
Thank you. We will open up, I know we went a little longer than we planned, right? But there was a lot of information to give you, right? I do want to make 2 quick comments, and if there's a couple of questions, we can take a few. Ms. Huzzy pointed out, and I'm happy she remembered what I said at opening day, most people were on social media, they weren't listening, but she obviously was listening, about that 1% gain. I wasn't talking about this that day, I was talking about educational growth, but this is a cultural change, right? I mentioned this when we were doing our planning meeting. I'm old enough to remember before the Surgeon General's report came out about cigarette smoking in the mid-60s, everybody was smoking. Schools had smoking lounges for faculty, for seniors, right? Went to the movie theater, there'd be clouds of smoke up in the, everybody was smoking. Who smokes? Not many people smoke now, and nobody thinks about smoking indoors, right? That took 20, 30, 40 years. That didn't happen overnight. So depending on where your children are, I think it's kind of good luck if you don't go home and tell a junior in high school, hey, guess what? I'm taking away your phone, and good luck with that, okay? But if you have a student who's 5 or 6 or 7 or 8, maybe they don't get the phone. Or maybe have that conversation like Ms. Romano, when I knew her, she was Bennett. Have a conversation with your 15, 16-year-old about curtailing some things. And there isn't a problem with changing course, right? We have to get over that too, even in society. If I come out and say, we're going to change something we're doing academically, people might say, what's wrong with it? Was he wrong the first time? No, things change, right? So if you found out that eating a certain type of food was unhealthy, maybe you'd stop eating it. There's nothing wrong with changing course. But these are conversations you have to have and decisions you have to have within your group of friends, within your family, to decide what course you want to take. Because I think Mr. Ursulisi's slide, and I know there were a lot of stuff there, it's hard to argue with some of that data. All of the stuff you saw today, we're going to have up online. We're going to put the PowerPoint up probably sooner than later. That'll probably go up maybe as early as today. So the books that Mr. Ryan talked about, you have them there, some of the links, some of the data. Eventually the video within a couple of days will go up. It'll all be on the Parent Academy. So you could look at it, you could tell people that weren't here, they could look at it, and they could go through it. So, I mean, hopefully that'll be helpful. We have another, I think the student assistant counselors met on PD Day, right? You guys developed a little one-page thing with a lot of links in it. We're going to get that up there too. That will take you to a lot of resources. So I know it's late. People have to get back to work. You have to get back to your life. Anybody have a question or anything you want to bring up that we didn't cover in the last? I think you get 3 graduate credits for this, by the way.
I just have one thing. The slides with the spreadsheets.
Yeah.
Very alarming. A lot of anxiety. I'm sure I'm going to pass that. The anxiety part, I'm not sure perhaps. But I'm just joking a little bit. But is there any thought about adding some of that to the curriculum, teaching about some of that stuff? It's okay to do that.
Well, yeah. Union School is developing for an elective for next year on executive functioning skills, which is going to cover a lot of that, but also bring some of this into it. In 3 of our buildings, we have a PLC, which is like a fancy word for a committee, looking at executive functioning and looking at this use. We've had discussions about this, both, just in terms, maybe not even curriculum, but conversations with kids or counselors. I mean, 2 of the folks that presented today are counselors, right? Supervisor, 2 supervisors.
So every October, we really focus on, again with this, we focus on education and providing, the kids with this type of information. We don't present it like this, but we're in every class, and Mrs. Romano does it. We do it through assemblies, and we're constantly I'm very transparent with the kids. We talk a lot about, the safety piece, and all that good stuff, but and the mental health impact. So we are getting to all of that, and then of course our student assistance program. We run groups for kids that are at risk. So whether it's self-esteem, anger management, executive functioning, anxiety. Anxieties are our biggest groups. I could speak for all of us in district. And what we're doing is allowing kids to be in the same space with their peers that are going through the same life experiences. And they get to see oh, I didn't know that this was normal. I didn't know that this was happening with you. And now we get to have these great coping skills. And it helps to help them get into school refusal, that helps school refusal and depression and all that good stuff. But we are constantly in. One of the things I always say though when it comes to this type of safety is that they don't believe us. So one of the things I stress, especially with the 6th grade, is that when you put something up online, when you send something through Snap, it goes away, it deletes, it never goes away. They cannot get it. My own daughter has had a situation, and I've said it, I say 5 things to her every day since she had her phone. Don't give your phone to anyone. What did she do? Gave her phone to someone, and it was a big to-do. So my point is, it's just because you can't see it, and the way I share this with them in 6th grade is I go in and I say, I'm your Snapchat account, I'm your TikTok account, can you see me? And yes, do I exist? Yes. I leave the room, I stand behind the door, and I say, scream from the hallway, can you see me? No. Do I still exist? Yes. Because they don't, even with that, someone is going to make a mistake. But we definitely are doing all of this in all of the schools across the district for sure. So.
And I want to also just note that if you looked on our website, and I don't know if it made the newsletter or not, but one of our English teachers at the high school took the concepts from this book, and they had their junior class, Mr. Ursulisi? Senior class, had them talk about the topics, and then come up with a little debate and discussion. And surprisingly, when the kids had the conversation, more of them agreed with the negative things that were in the book. You see, we can't be afraid to have conversations with kids. They're smarter than we give them credit for. Right? And when your own kids, a lot smarter than you probably give them credit for. They drive you nuts sometimes, but they get it. Have a conversation. May not be aware of some of this stuff. And not a conversation like we all have as dads or granddads. Oh, when I was a kid, but have a real conversation about some of the concerns. The same way you might have a conversation with them about drinking, right? Or being safe when they drive, or sexuality, or, this is a topic that impacts them too. So have a conversation. And, it can't hurt, right? If you come from a good place. So like we're saying, small steps. You're not going to change cultural behavior overnight. But if you could reduce some of it, make people think about it. It's like when you're thinking, should I go back to have another munchkin right now? And you're thinking about the pros and cons of that. At least you're thinking about it. So if the kids could think about it, I think these are conversations worth having. And if we could start making small changes, and we could start making changes with our younger kids, we can start to balance it a little bit. Get those graphs going back more to where they were a couple of years ago. Any other questions?
I have just a comment. It's like, in terms of as this progresses and the discussion, I think what could also be helpful is, so I'm a mental health clinician, and when we think about addictions, right, substance use in a more traditional sense, yes, there's the abstinence or the reduction of harm, but it's what is the void? And I think what would be helpful is also exploring as a community, what's the void? What does this technology, what do these behaviors fulfill or try and fulfill, right? And so as, one of the things that the social media is a perfect storm of events that have been going on for decades. And part of that is the lack of, it kind of became a child-focused world and a lack of adult influence in that world. And so social media has just completely, pushed us over the cliff. That children's world is so focused on the world of the child and their peers, and they have really lost connections from a larger fabric of community which involves multi-generations, right? And adult influence and having adult role models.
So how to replicate in the real world with social media, right? That's your comment, right? Well, I just had, right, Monica.
Yes.
She met with me, well, she briefly talked to me before, and you said you wanted...
Yeah, absolutely. As one of the scout leaders in town, I spend a lot of time with these children in a non-academic environment. Last week when they were off from school, we took a group of them to Gettysburg for 4 days. And after our 10-mile hikes, and after we got back and they cooked, they pulled out the board games. They pulled out the card games. They're craving this interaction and this lack of cell phone use and distraction. Of course they want to go on it before they go to bed, but it's that ability for them to work together and overcome those insults that Mr. Salisi was talking about. It happens, but they overcome it. They know how to do it because they're constantly working together real time in the real world. And this is one of the ways that I see in Rutherford and in any town that we can help these kids, is give them these opportunities with organizations that allow them to work together, be together, overcome obstacles together.
So a couple of, and I came this close, so hopefully my mic picked her up. And you asked to meet with me to talk a little bit about how we could partner a little bit, and we're going to do that. So, we're running long. I don't want to get, I know Ms. Coy was going to talk about, but we'll have another discussion about it probably when we do the executive function, this Let Grow program that we're trying to get going in schools, a national program, which asks parents voluntarily to say, let your kid do something independently that you didn't let them do before, right? Let them walk the dog, let them cook a meal, let them, let them develop in those executive functioning skills. Getting involved with recreation, with scouting, with church groups, with school groups, activities, right? I mean, when I was a high school principal, every year when I'd start school with a parent orientation, get your child to be involved in an activity, wherever it is. There's enough clubs, enough activity. Get them to do something when they're with real people. If they're an athlete, great. If they're a musician, if they're an actor, civic community, there's clubs for everything, right? Getting them involved to replace that, to force, right, for lack of a better word, interaction with other people, interaction with adults, right? Get that appeal. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's something I think that we have to work together on. During the summer, I saw on the news, I don't remember the town, it might have been Cedar Grove or somewhere out in that area, a group of parents and with their teenage girls, said, you're all going to put your phone in a Tupperware container and close it up, and for 1 week, you're not going to get the phone at all. And then they brought them back together for a week, and the kids kind of reflected on the good and the bad of it. And there was a news story about it, because it was a series on NBC that was in relation to this book that came out. Maybe you get a group of friends, you do that, You're going to have some angry children for a week, but, nonetheless. But I think you're right. We have to find, you can't take away that cigarette addiction and not have something that's going to get the person through it, right? We have to develop other resources to replace what they think they're getting there. And I think this conversation leads to that. Any other questions or comments? I know it's... Okay, well, maybe my last bit of advice is if you want to have a peaceful weekend, wait till Monday to have this conversation with your kids. Don't go home right away. I find that, you want the resource to get through a nice bottle of wine might help you get through the conversation. But I think I want to thank, everybody who's involved in putting this together. They spent a lot of time working on it, we are going to run this again geared a little more to the K-3 crowd with a little slightly different approach, but it's going to be kind of the same thing. So if anybody says, I would have liked to have been there or whatever, look for the date that we're doing that. Yeah. When is it? Yeah, good, you got it. And then we're doing 2 others. We're going to do one that's strictly going to focus on executive functioning or that free play. The free play, if you have kids in high school, doesn't sound like, but it's still a term. Let them go out. And I always marveled. When I was a coach for 100 years, and when I was coaching my kids in club and things like that, like if I called practice every day of the week, they would go. But to go out on their own and do it, like I did that as a kid every day, they don't do it. I had to call practice, and yet they never balked about going. Oh yeah, we'll be there. So get them free play. Go out and do it. If you like doing something, you should want to do it, right? So we're going to have that kind of conversation going down the road. Okay. Thank you, everybody. Thank you all.